Warning. The HD rants contain scenes of graphic ranting, vein-popping rage, and coarse language. Viewer discretion is advised.
I need hardcore ranting fuel. No. Aha! I'll inject myself with some red-hot beef burritos. Ah, perfect. Believe me, you don't want to see me eat these in high def. I'll see you after I food up. Oh, where to begin? Where to begin? I'm getting really tired of all these videos I'm seeing lately from so-called film experts, from so-called movie buffs, people who claim to know what film is all about, claim to be really knowledgeable about film, and they go and buy a Blu-ray of something, and they hold it up and say, "This was a horrible transfer. It was all grainy." Do these film experts and film fans and film buffs not actually know what film looks like? Apparently not. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Grain. Good? Bad? Well, a little bit of both. Kind of depends what you mean by grain. But we're going to try to clear up some of the confusion today on the HD Rants. You know, this wasn't very good because it was grainy thing doesn't just apply to other people on YouTube doing their own personal opinion-based reviews of things. No. I see this on professional reviews as well. People being paid to do reviews who clearly don't understand film and don't know what film looks like and what it's supposed to look like. Okay, now I think where the problem started was with DVD. Because for a lot of people, DVD was sort of their introduction to digital video. Now, a DVD, when you have a poorly mastered DVD, you get, well, what some people call graininess. It's actually digital artifacting and macro blocking and pixelization and things like that. That's not grain, okay? That's something else entirely. That's basically the limitations of the format, limitations of the codec, in this case MPEG-2, that was used to encode the DVD, and the fact that they didn't use a high enough bitrate to compensate for, you know, the dark scenes or fast motion scenes and things like that. So you end up with pixelization and, you know, a dirty picture. It's not the way it's supposed to look. It's just because, you know, they just didn't do a very good job of the DVD, so it looks crappy. Now in that case, yeah, obviously you want to point that out if you're doing a review. You want to say, hey, this doesn't look very good because it's got all this digital artifacting all over it and it creates undesirable elements in the image. Now here's the thing. With Blu-ray and high definition, we now have a format that is capable of reproducing the source material far more accurately than anything we've had before. And I think the problem is, people look at a nicely transferred older movie on Blu-ray, see film grain, and assume that that's a digital artifact, because that's what they've been accustomed to. That's what they're used to, that type of image noise being. They've come to learn that to be noise, to be an undesirable artifact of a poorly mastered disc. Now in the case of Blu-ray, that's not always the case. I mean, sure, there's some earlier titles in particular that actually still used MPEG-2 had horrible transfers, and they were horribly overcompressed and had lots of artifacting and pixelization, and they were just awful. Nowadays, that's becoming less and less of a problem as the studios have started to use the far superior AVC and VC1 codecs. AVC is the sharper of the two, by the way, in case you're wondering. Both of which give much cleaner images than MPEG-2 could ever dream of. Now, we need to backtrack a little bit here. I see so many people listing graininess of the image as a negative, and that's not always the case. Now, I need to inform you of a little something here that I think a lot of people are painfully unaware of, and that is what exactly creates the image on a strip of film. You do know that when you go to a movie theater, you're watching a film, right? A big real film running through a projector, actual physical reels of film with individual 35 or 70 millimeter frames on the film. So it's like a big strip of film that's run through the projector at 24 frames per second. Okay? You know that, right? Now, you know how with a digital image, this isn't a perfect equation, but it'll give you sort of the general idea. Now, with a digital image, the image is composed of pixels. The more pixels you have, the finer the detail and such. It's sort of the whole basis of what makes 1080p so great, is that it's far more pixels than we've ever had before to create these digital images that we're enjoying. 6 times the resolution of DVD. With film, the image on film is actually composed of grain. There is actual little tiny physical particles of metal, little granules of metal on the actual film itself. Without grain, you have no image. It would just be a clear strip of plastic that the light would shine through, and you'd be watching nothing but a blazing white screen for 2 hours. Well, you probably wouldn't watch it for 2 hours, but with no grain, there's no picture. So how does this relate to Blu-ray? Well, as I said at the beginning, Blu-ray is capable of reproducing the source material closer to the quality of the source material than anything we've ever had before. Now, there's another thing I keep hearing a lot, and it's completely wrong. Completely wrong. And that is, people have this mindset that, oh, I thought Blu-ray was supposed to provide crisp, clean, perfect images for everything. Why do these old movies look all grainy? Because those old films were filmed with film. Film is composed of film grain. If you remove the film grain, you remove the image. If you reduce the film grain, you reduce the detail. That gets into something I'm going to talk about in another episode very shortly, namely digital noise reduction, which is used on some releases to reduce film grain in an attempt to make older films look like newer films. But it doesn't make older films look like newer films, it makes older films look like crap, because it scrubs out all the detail. But that's a whole other issue that we'll get into in a full episode later. This is basically just a little bit of grain education for you, okay? Now, the amount of grain that you see in a film is going to vary based on a number of factors. One of the biggest factors is the size of the film frame. The smaller the frame, the more visible and noticeable the grain will be. So, for example, a Super 8 or 16mm film frame will exhibit much more visible, noticeable grain than, say, a 35 or 70mm. In fact, 70mm, the grain tends to be so fine that it's almost invisible. It's still there. You know, if you look closely, you can see it, but it's nowhere near as apparent as a 35, 16, or 8mm frame. The other factor, what type of film stock did they use? Did they use nice high-quality stock, really expensive, the good stuff? Or did they use something cheap because they were on a limited budget? Cheaper film stock tends to have more visible grain. Now, this isn't always an undesirable effect. Sometimes filmmakers want to use cheaper film stock because of the more visible grain for artistic purposes. But that's neither here nor there. We're just talking about grain in general. The bottom line is, if a film was filmed with film, a proper transfer of that to Blu-ray should have the natural film grain of that film visibly intact. Because without that, you lose the detail. And the detail is the whole reason you bought Blu-ray in the first place. So no, Blu-ray is not supposed to make everything look clean and shiny and perfect and new. What it's supposed to do is more accurately represent the source material. So if it's a Pixar movie, of course it's going to look clean and shiny and perfect and new, because that's all digital. That's 100% pure digital from start to finish. There was no film in the process anywhere. If there's any film grain in a Pixar movie or some other CG movie, it's because they added it in post-production because that was the look they wanted. But in the case of anything sourced from film, the grain should be visible to at least some degree, depending on how visible it is on the original print. So I look at, you know, people doing Blu-ray reviews of stuff like Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters is a beautiful transfer. It's not a perfect transfer. The gamma level's set a little too high and some of the contrast is a bit blown out. But the colors are sharper, the framing's corrected, and the film grain is intact. All the graininess that you see in Ghostbusters is supposed to be there. I'm getting so sick of seeing Blu-ray reviewers on YouTube saying, "Oh, this was a horrible transfer. It was the worst transfer I ever saw." It's supposed to look like that! In fact, pretty much any movie from the 80s is going to look like that, or pretty similar to that. They used very grainy film stock all throughout the 70s and 80s. And the phone's ringing. I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. Now, I see a lot of, I guess you call grain, like film grain supporters getting flack from people who just don't really seem to get where we're coming from when we talk about film grain. It's not that we don't want to see a film restored. Okay, restoration is completely different than what this particular issue is. If it's an older film, filmed on film, it should have grain present. It's as simple as that. Now, that doesn't mean that if there's damage to the print or cigarette burns from whatever, or you know, scratches and dirt and hair, that shouldn't be fixed. Of course it should. But for God's sake, don't leave it to some automated algorithm. No, that kind of repair work should be done by hand. You look at the fine work that Lowry Digital did with the most of the classic James Bond movies. Fan-freaking-tastic. That's the way classic movies should be handled. Visible film grain, beautiful color, and just everything done to near perfection. I mean, they're just fantastic transfers. So I don't know what more I can say. Basically, grain is good. DNR is bad. DNR being digital noise reduction, i.e. the removal of grain for Blu-ray. But we'll talk about DNR next time, or if not next time, then soon. Until then, I hope I cleared things up a little bit for you. Film grain is not a digital artifact like artifacting on DVD. It is a desirable element of anything sourced from film. Get it? Good. Alright, that's it from me to you for now. Thanks for watching, and sayonara.